A canine German Shepherd team on a routine exercise stumbles upon a shocking discovery. A prison escapee, chained to a tree, barely alive. But instead of panic, the dogs take control, acting with precision, courage, and loyalty to save him. But who abandoned him here and why? As the mystery unravels, secrets darker than anyone could imagine begin to surface. What happens next will break your heart. Don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories of courage and loyalty. The wind howled through the barren landscape as a fierce winter storm blanketed the small town of Ravenwood. Located in the isolated mountains of Wyoming, the town was used to harsh conditions, but nothing quite like this. A biting chill cut through the air, and the snow had begun to fall in thick sheets, covering everything in sight. The only sound breaking the eerie silence of the wilderness was the crunch of snow underfoot. Amidst the swirling white chaos stood an abandoned gas station, its metal signs rusted and windows shattered. Once a bustling stop for weary travelers, it now stood as a forgotten relic of a time long past, with its peeling paint and empty lot. It was here that Jake Lawson found himself, chained to a cold, gnarled pine tree, the bitter wind cutting through his thin jacket as if it were a blade. Jake Lawson was a man with a story, but none of it could be seen in the ragged clothes he wore now. At 30 years old, he had once been a highly trained Special Forces operative. Tall, with a muscular frame that spoke of strength and discipline, his dark brown hair had grown shaggy in the months since his escape. His eyes, a deep steel blue, now appeared clouded with exhaustion and pain. His jaw was sharp, marked by a few days of stubble, and the light stubble around his chin had grown darker from lack of grooming. His hands, bound behind his back by thick metal chains, were raw, the skin broken from his futile attempts to break free. He had been here for hours, perhaps longer, ever since he had been abandoned in the middle of nowhere. He could barely feel his fingers, the cold so penetrating that it made his body feel as if it was shutting down. Jake had been wrong. He had been accused of a crime he didn't commit, an operation gone wrong, a miscommunication, a betrayal that led to his imprisonment. His goal now was singular: prove his innocence and escape the unjust system that had condemned him. But the road to that was not an easy one. The men who had abandoned him here, leaving him to die in the snow, were well aware that if they let him survive, he would come back for them. They had no intention of letting him live. His fate was sealed, it seemed. No one would come for him. He was alone. His breath came in short, painful bursts. The cold was becoming unbearable, gnawing at his bones, and the hours seemed to stretch on endlessly. His muscles ached from the strain of the chains, and his throat felt raw from the howling wind. As the storm raged, Jake's eyes fluttered shut, struggling to stay awake. His mind wandered to memories of his time in the military, of missions, of comrades, of a time when life had been full of purpose and meaning. It all felt so distant now, like a dream he couldn't quite remember. But just as the darkness began to creep in, he heard it. A faint sound at first, something almost imperceptible. The crunch of snow. It was coming closer, drawing nearer through the thick blanket of snow that enveloped the landscape. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Was it another hallucination, a trick of the cold? Or was it real? His mind raced, and he strained his ears, trying to focus. The sound grew louder, more distinct now. There were steps, deep, deliberate footfalls, cutting through the snow with purpose. At first, panic surged in his chest. Wolves? Had they come for him? Drawn by his scent? No, it wasn't wolves. The sound was too organized, too purposeful. He tried to lift his head, blinking against the bitter cold, squinting through the blowing snow. That's when he saw them. Emerging from the snowstorm, like shadows against the white landscape, were 5 German Shepherds. They moved with an almost military precision, their thick coats dusted with snow, their eyes alert and golden. Each dog moved with purpose, as if they had a mission to complete. The leader of the pack, a larger dog with a scar over his left eye, led the way. The dogs weren't lost. They weren't stray animals looking for food. No, these dogs had been trained. They had a job to do. Jake's breath caught in his throat as the lead dog, Titan, approached him. The dog's stance was commanding, not aggressive, but protective. Titan's eyes locked with Jake's, as though he understood exactly what was at stake. For a moment, Jake wondered if he was imagining it, but the dog's gaze was intense, focused, unwavering. The other dogs began to spread out around him, their movements sharp and coordinated. One of them, a smaller female named Daisy, began to circle the tree, sniffing around for any weaknesses in the chains. Another, a sturdy male called Axel, stood at the ready, his body tense as if waiting for an order. Jake, though weak and near delirium, managed to whisper hoarsely, "Good boy." Titan responded with a slight nod, his ears perking up as he seemed to understand the praise. The dogs moved with precision, one digging around the base of the tree where the chains met the bark, revealing the padlock that held him captive. Titan's bark echoed through the empty space, sharp and commanding, and Jake could hear the sound of more footsteps approaching. It wasn't just the dogs that had found him. Someone else was coming. The footsteps grew louder, and then a man appeared. Michael Hayes, a local park ranger, who had been patrolling nearby. When he saw the dogs, he knew something was wrong. These are no ordinary animals. They were trained K9s, the kind used in search and rescue operations. He had heard stories of the loyalty and courage of these dogs, but to see it firsthand was something else entirely. Michael's heart raced as he approached. His large frame, clad in heavy winter gear, cut through the snow with urgency. He was a man in his late 30s, rugged, with a square jaw and deep brown eyes. His hair was short and dark, his skin tanned from years of working outdoors. There was an air of quiet confidence about him, honed from years of experience in the field. But today, as he approached the group of dogs and saw the man chained to the tree, that confidence was tempered with disbelief. Michael dropped to his knees beside Jake, quickly assessing the situation. The dog stepped back, allowing him to get close. "He's alive," Michael muttered to himself, his voice low. But not for long. He moved quickly, pulling out his knife to cut through the chains, his hands shaking slightly from the cold. The dogs, still alert and watchful, stood by, their heads turned toward him in anticipation. They knew their job wasn't done yet. "Hang in there," Michael said softly to Jake, his voice full of compassion. "We're getting you out of here." Just as Michael was about to finish cutting the last chain, he heard the distant hum of a vehicle approaching. The dogs barked in unison, as if signaling that their task was almost complete. Titan, who had remained closest to Jake, let out a final, triumphant bark. Michael looked up, seeing a park ranger SUV approaching through the thick snow, its lights flashing. The rescue had come just in time. The storm was relentless. As the snow continued to fall, the wind howled, making it difficult for anyone to see more than a few feet in front of them. Ravenwood was a town known for its isolation, and the conditions were harsh, even for seasoned rangers. However, it was a perfect training day for the K9 unit. At the edge of the forest, a small team of 4 highly trained German Shepherds had been deployed to conduct a search and rescue exercise. These dogs weren't just pets. They were highly specialized working dogs, each trained for specific tasks, from tracking and detection to search and rescue in the most extreme conditions. The dogs were led by their handler, Officer Rachel Vance, a woman in her early 30s with a serious yet warm demeanor. Rachel had a strong, athletic build, standing at 5 feet 8 inches, with short-cropped brown hair that framed her face and bright, intelligent brown eyes. She was the type of person who lived for the work, and the bond she shared with her dogs was evident. Her background in military canine units and search operations had shaped her into the strong-willed woman she was today. However, her resilience had come at a price. Her sternness with people often masked the warmth she had for animals, a warmth that only her dogs truly knew. The dogs, Titan, Daisy, Axel, and Max, were each distinct in their own right, and they knew their roles better than anyone. Titan, the largest and oldest of the group, had a commanding presence. His thick coat was a mix of black and brown, with a noticeable scar over his left eye, a reminder of his years of service. At 8 years old, Titan had seen it all. He had been through the hardest training, the most dangerous missions, and had proved himself time and again. His demeanor was calm but assertive, and he commanded respect from his fellow dogs and even from Rachel. Daisy was the smallest, a sleek female with a coat of rich tan and black. At 6 years old, she was a firecracker, quick on her feet and always the first to jump into action. Her eyes were bright and always observant, and she had a particular knack for sniffing out even the smallest of hidden clues. Axel, a 7-year-old male, was the muscle of the group. His broad shoulders and muscular frame made him the strongest, capable of pulling or carrying heavy loads when necessary. His temperament was steady, though he could be a bit stubborn at times. Max, the youngest at just 4 years old, had a goofy side to him, always wagging his tail and trying to make others laugh. His youthful energy made him endearing, but when it came to work, he was all business. The dogs had been working through the snow-covered terrain, sniffing the air, alert to every sound, every scent. Their mission was simple: track down a missing person as part of their routine training. But fate had other plans for them that day. Rachel, as usual, kept a close watch on them, her eyes scanning the horizon, ensuring that each dog stayed on task. However, the storm had caused confusion. The visibility was so poor that, before Rachel realized it, the dogs had drifted away from her. It wasn't like them to stray, but the conditions were disorienting. She called out to them, but the howling wind drowned her voice. For a brief moment, she lost sight of them. The canine unit, trained to work in pairs or small teams, was now separated. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. The wind picked up and the snow swirled around her, making everything feel like it was moving in slow motion. But the dogs didn't panic. Titan, as the leader, immediately took charge. He barked a short, commanding bark to the others, signaling them to stay close. Daisy, ever the keen one, darted ahead, her nose twitching as she followed an unfamiliar scent. Axel and Max, without hesitation, followed her lead, moving with precision through the blizzard. As they made their way deeper into the forest, the trail became harder to follow. Titan, however, was a natural leader. His instincts were sharp, and he led the pack through the thickening snow with unmatched confidence. It wasn't long before they came across a strange scent. Titan stopped dead in his tracks, his nose high in the air. He sniffed deeply, his sharp eyes scanning the distance. There, amidst the swirling snowflakes and the dense trees, something caught Titan's attention. It was faint at first, barely perceptible through the storm, but there was a human scent, a faint trace of blood mixed with the bitter scent of winter. Titan's ears pricked up, and he moved forward, determined to find the source. The others followed closely, and as they pushed through the snow-covered brush, they stumbled upon something neither Rachel nor the dog had expected. A man, barely conscious, hanging from a tree, his wrists bound by thick chains. Titan approached first, his movements deliberate and careful. The other dogs circled around the man, their noses sniffing the air, trying to assess the situation. They could sense the man's distress. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and his face was bruised, bloodied, and pale from the cold. His clothing was torn, and his body was covered in cuts and scrapes, evidence of his struggles. Titan sniffed at the chains, his ears back in concern. He barked once, short and sharp, the sound cutting through the howling wind. The dog stood still, waiting for Rachel to catch up. Titan's eyes were focused on the man's face, and for a moment, Rachel could have sworn the dog seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Rachel finally reached the group, her heart racing. She knelt beside the man, looking at him closely. His appearance was shocking. He was a young man, maybe in his early 30s, with dark, unkempt hair and a rugged face. His blue eyes, though bloodshot, held a flicker of recognition as he looked up at her. Jake Lawson, Rachel murmured under her breath. She had heard the name before. Jake Lawson was a man who had escaped from a nearby prison, a man who was rumored to be innocent but had been wrongly convicted of a crime. His face matched the descriptions she had read in the papers. But why was he here, chained to a tree in the middle of the woods? And who had left him here to die? Titan barked again, this time more urgently, nudging Rachel's arm with his head, as if to remind her that time was running out. The storm was worsening, and Jake's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Rachel's mind raced as she took out her knife to cut through the chains. "Hold on, Jake," she whispered. "We're getting you out of here." She worked quickly, knowing that every second counted. The snow was falling harder now, the wind picking up in intensity, and Jake's body was growing colder by the minute. As she freed his wrists, she noticed the deep wounds on his hands, raw and bleeding. It was clear that he had been struggling for hours, perhaps even days, trying to break free. But in the face of the storm and his injuries, Jake had nothing left to give. He was barely holding on. Titan's eyes never left him. The dog's calm and steady presence seemed to provide Jake with the strength to hang on a little longer. Rachel glanced at Titan and nodded, silently thanking him for his unwavering loyalty. Within moments, Rachel had Jake propped up, leaning against her for support. Titan and the others stood watch, their eyes scanning the woods for any signs of danger. The storm had not relented, and the path back to safety would be treacherous. "We need to move now," Rachel said firmly, turning toward the direction of the nearest ranger station. Titan barked once, leading the way, with the rest of the dogs following close behind. They moved as a team, each dog aware of its role, and with Rachel guiding Jake, they pushed forward through the storm. Jake's life had been saved, but the journey was far from over. The storm raged on, and the truth of what had happened to him in these woods was just beginning to unfold. The wind howled through the trees, bending the branches as the snowstorm continued its unrelenting assault on the landscape. The cold was biting, and every breath felt like inhaling shards of ice. Despite the intense conditions, Titan, the large German shepherd, remained steadfast. His black and brown fur was dusted with snow, his powerful frame unwavering as he circled Jake, who was still slumped against the tree, barely conscious. Titan sniffed the air, his keen senses picking up Jake's scent, now tinged with blood and desperation. The dog's intelligent eyes narrowed, and without hesitation, he started digging through the thick snow near Jake's wrists. His large paws moved swiftly, unearthing the chains that bound the young man to the frozen tree. The sound of Titan's determined paws on the snow was a steady rhythm, a heartbeat in the otherwise silent wilderness. Daisy, the smaller, agile dog, barked excitedly, her tail wagging as she circled Jake. She was a 6-year-old female with sleek tan and black fur, her nose twitching with every scent she picked up. Daisy was quick and observant, and unlike Titan's serious demeanor, she was always full of energy. She barked again, louder this time, as though calling for help, her voice sharp and clear in the stillness of the storm. As Daisy continued to alert the others, Axel, the strong and muscular dog, positioned himself in front of Jake, his protective instincts flaring. His broad chest and sturdy build made him the powerhouse of the team. Axel was calm but resolute, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. Though not as quick as Daisy, Axel's presence was a comforting one. His job was to keep everyone safe, and he did it without hesitation. Max, the youngest and most energetic, bounded around the area, his playful demeanor contrasting with the tension of the moment. He was a 4-year-old dog, with a goofy personality that made him endearing to everyone. However, even in his youthful exuberance, Max was aware of the importance of the task at hand. His sharp eyes never lost focus as he followed his team's lead, ensuring that everything went according to plan. The K9 team worked together as a well-oiled machine, despite the fact that they were without their handler, Rachel. They had been trained to function as a unit, regardless of the situation. That they didn't need commands. Instinct, trust, and teamwork drove their actions. The mission was clear: save Jake Lawson, a man who had been abandoned in the snow, and who may not survive the harsh conditions without help. The snow continued to fall heavily, creating a thick blanket across the forest floor. Jake's breath came in shallow gasps, his face pale and bloodied from his struggles. He couldn't feel his hands anymore, and his legs were numb from the cold. His vision was blurry, and he was slipping in and out of consciousness. But he could hear the dogs, He could hear their determined barks, their urgent movements as they worked to free him. Jake barely managed to whisper, his voice hoarse, "Good boy." Titan stopped digging for a moment and looked up at Jake, as if acknowledging the praise. It wasn't just instinct that drove him. It was his bond with Rachel, his bond with all humans who showed him kindness. Titan wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a soldier, and now he was a lifeline to Jake. Just as Titan succeeded in breaking through the chain, a shadow loomed from the distance. The sound of crunching snow underfoot caught the dog's attention. Titan, ever watchful, immediately turned toward the approaching footsteps, his body stiffening in preparation for whatever was coming next. Rachel's absence was felt, but Titan knew his role. He wasn't just a rescue dog, he was a guardian. The other dogs followed Titan's lead, standing alert, eyes fixed on the newcomer. The figure emerging from a storm was a man, his silhouette barely visible against the blizzard. Michael Hayes, a local firefighter, trudged through the deep snow, his dark coat and yellow gear a sharp contrast to the white landscape. Michael was a man in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, with short-cropped dark hair and a rugged face that showed the wear of years spent battling the elements. His eyes were sharp, always scanning his surroundings with the kind of awareness honed through years of fighting fires and rescuing people in treacherous conditions. Michael had been on a routine patrol through the area, checking on the storm's progress and ensuring no one was stranded in the woods. He'd heard the distant barks of the dogs, and, knowing they weren't supposed to be out here without their handler, grew concerned. The K-9 unit was usually led by Rachel Vance, a trusted handler in the area. It was unusual to see them working independently, and something about the way the dogs were acting triggered Michael's instincts. As he neared the dogs, Michael called out, "Hey, what's going on here?" Titan didn't bark but gave a low growl, his eyes narrowed, assessing the newcomer. The other dogs stayed close to Jake, forming a protective circle around him. Michael hesitated for a moment, sensing that the situation was more serious than it appeared. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm just trying to help." The dogs seemed to accept this, their stances relaxing slightly. Titan stepped aside, allowing Michael to approach Jake. Michael's heart sank as he saw the man, barely conscious, with his hands bound and covered in blood. He quickly knelt beside him, his hands moving to assess Jake's condition. "Jake Lawson," Michael muttered under his breath, recognizing the face. He had heard the name, a man who had escaped from prison, accused of a crime he hadn't committed. Michael wasn't familiar with the full story, but he knew enough to be wary. Still, the situation before him was far from ordinary. Jake barely opened his eyes, his voice a faint rasp. "Help, please," he whispered, his words barely audible over the howling wind. Michael's thoughts raced. He wasn't sure who Jake was running from, but it didn't matter right now. The man needed help, and Michael wasn't going to turn his back. "Stay with me, Jake. I've got you," Michael said firmly, his hands working quickly to free Jake from the chains. The cold had done its damage, and Michael could feel Jake's body shivering uncontrollably. He knew they needed to move fast. Titan and the other dogs stood by, their eyes constantly scanning the area for threats. The storm was fierce, but the dogs' loyalty was unwavering. They wouldn't leave Jake's side. Michael finally freed Jake from the chains, carefully lifting him into his arms. The K-9 team followed closely, staying within range, ready to assist if needed. Michael glanced around, his senses heightened. He knew the journey back to safety wouldn't be easy. The storm was worsening, and the distance to the nearest ranger station was still far. But for now, there was no choice but to move forward. "Let's get you out of here," Michael said quietly, his words more for himself than for Jake. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but with the K-9 team leading the way, he felt a glimmer of hope. The wind was relentless, and the snowstorm showed no signs of relenting as Michael Hayes carefully carried Jake Lawson through the biting cold. The young man, barely conscious, shivered uncontrollably in Michael's arms. The K-9 team, led by Titan, remained on high alert, moving steadily through the snow as if they had done it 1,000 times before. The storm raged around them, but the dogs, though tired from their earlier efforts, never faltered in their dedication. The journey was long and grueling, but Michael knew it was the only option if they had any hope of saving Jake. Jake's condition was dire. His skin was pale, and his breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps. The blood loss from the chains around his wrists had drained him, and he was growing weaker with each passing minute. The K9s moved in close, with Titan occasionally stopping to nudge Jake, as if urging him to hang on just a little longer. As they approached the edge of the forest, the outline of the ranger station became visible, its lights flickering in the distance like a beacon of hope. Michael's pace quickened, and the K9s, sensing the urgency, fell into a tight formation around them, guiding Michael through the snow and toward safety. The station's warm glow felt like a sanctuary against the howling winds. Michael pushed open the door with his foot, his body aching with exhaustion, but he didn't stop. He carried Jake inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The warmth of the building was overwhelming after the frigid cold of the forest, and Michael's first instinct was to lay Jake down on the nearest table. A nurse, Sarah Lawrence, appeared from the hallway, her sharp blue eyes immediately assessing the situation. Sarah, in her late 30s, was tall and slender, with a graceful presence that made her seem almost ethereal in contrast to the chaos unfolding around her. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, and her medical scrubs were covered in a light dusting of snow from her previous rounds. She was a woman of few words, but her actions spoke volumes. She had been working in this station for years, helping those who had been brought in from the wilds of the surrounding wilderness. Her calm demeanor had been forged over countless encounters with the injured and the lost, but even she could not hide the flicker of concern that crossed her face when she saw Jake's condition. "What happened?" she asked, her voice steady but urgent. Michael set Jake down on the examination table, his hands trembling slightly. "He was abandoned in the woods, left to die," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "He's been through hell. I found him chained to a tree. He needs help now." Sarah quickly moved into action, her fingers working swiftly to check Jake's vitals. Titan, the lead K9, sat at the edge of the room, his golden eyes focused on Jake, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. The other dogs, Daisy, Axel, and Max, stayed close, their eyes scanning the room and ensuring no one else entered. They were protectors through and through. As Sarah worked, Michael paced restlessly, unable to tear his gaze away from Jake. The man had been in such a state of distress when he had found him. Michael's mind kept racing, but one thought stood out above the rest. Who had left him out there to die? It wasn't until Sarah had finished bandaging Jake's wrists that she spoke again. "He's lost a lot of blood, but he's stable for now. We'll need to keep him under observation, but there's something strange about his wounds. The chains, they were too tight, intentionally so. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Michael's blood ran cold. He had suspected something like this. Jake had been abandoned in such a manner that it felt personal, like a message. But this was beyond what Michael had expected. Sarah continued, not noticing Michael's growing unease. "You said he was abandoned by someone, but I have to ask, how did you know to look for him?" Michael hesitated, his eyes shifting toward the K9s. "I didn't. The dogs led me to him. They found him first." Sarah gave him a confused look. "The dogs? Alone?" Michael nodded. "Yeah, they were separated from their handler, but they acted like a team, like they knew exactly what they were doing." Sarah seemed taken aback. "I've never heard of that before. But you're right, these dogs are special. They've been through intense training. It sounds like they saved his life." As Sarah stepped out of the room to grab additional medical supplies, Michael's thoughts swirled. He knew that what had happened to Jake was no accident. The level of violence, the calculated decision to leave him there, spoke to a deeper conspiracy. But who would do such a thing? As Michael sat in the quiet room, the weight of the situation settled on him. He thought about his own history, about the years he spent in the military working with special forces. His experiences with covert operations and underground criminal organizations had given him insight into how these things worked. He had dealt with people who would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. But this, leaving a man to die in the cold, was a different kind of cruelty. And then it hit him. The realization struck like a punch to the gut. The people responsible for this weren't just random criminals. These were the same individuals Michael had dealt with in the past, the ones who operated in the shadows, pulling the strings of the criminal world, the ones who had connections within the government and law enforcement, the ones who were untouchable. Suddenly, it became clear. Jake wasn't just a victim. He was a pawn in something much bigger. Michael stood up abruptly, his mind racing. He had to make a decision. He couldn't just walk away from this. He had already stepped into a much larger world than he had anticipated. But the question lingered, should he help Jake? Michael glanced at Titan, who had been sitting quietly at the edge of the room, his eyes locked on Jake. The dog seemed to understand what was going on. Michael sighed, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. He knew what he had to do. He had already made a promise to help Jake, and now there was no turning back. "I'm in," Michael muttered to himself. As the hours passed, Sarah worked tirelessly to stabilize Jake. The dogs remained by his side, guarding him with the unwavering loyalty that only K9S could possess. When Jake finally stirred, his eyes fluttering open, Michael was there, standing by his side. Titan, sensing Jake's awareness, moved closer and nuzzled the man gently. Jake's voice was a hoarse whisper. "I don't know how to thank you," he said weakly. Michael smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "Don't thank me yet. We have a long road ahead." As the storm outside began to ease, Michael knew that the true battle was just beginning. What he had uncovered today was only the tip of the iceberg. Whoever had left Jake to die was still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had finished what they started. But Michael Hayes wasn't about to let that happen. Not if he could help it. The sterile white walls of the infirmary had never felt more suffocating to Jake. The dull beeping of the heart monitor beside him was a reminder of how close he had come to death. His head felt foggy, his body weak, and every muscle in him ached from the brutal cold and exhaustion. As he slowly opened his eyes, the world around him was blurry. The smell of antiseptic and the warmth of the room made him realize just how far he had come from the freezing wilderness. But more than that, he felt the weight of the decisions ahead, decisions that would shape the rest of his life. Jake turned his head, and there, standing by his bedside, was Michael Hayes, the firefighter who had saved his life. Michael's presence was both comforting and imposing. At 6 feet 2 inches, with a muscular build that spoke of years of hard work, Michael had a ruggedness to him that came from working in the field, from dealing with life-or-death situations on a daily basis. His short, dark hair was beginning to gray at the temples, and his brown eyes, though warm, carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. There was a hardness to his face, a result of the countless hours spent saving lives, but there was also compassion, especially when he looked at Jake now. He had saved him, yes, but Michael's instincts told him that there was more to this story than met the eye. "Hey, you're awake," Michael said softly, his voice like gravel, as he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Jake closely. Jake's throat was dry, but he managed a hoarse whisper. "How long?" "Only a few hours," Michael replied. "You've been through a lot, but you're safe now." Jake blinked, his mind foggy from the drugs Sarah had given him, and memories of the nightmarish trek through the forest flooded back. "The dogs, they saved me." His voice trailed off as he remembered the loyal K9 team. "Titan, Daisy, Axel, they're outside," Michael said. "They're not leaving your side." Jake felt a warmth spread through him at the thought. Those dogs had been his salvation. In a world where people had abandoned him, those animals had not. They had sensed his pain and acted with an intelligence and loyalty that seemed almost human. "Where am I?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. "Ranger Station," Michael answered, his tone reassuring. "You're safe here, Jake, but there's something we need to talk about." Jake turned his head slowly, trying to focus on Michael's face. "What is it?" His voice was thick with uncertainty. Michael's face darkened as he sat down on the edge of Jake's bed, his eyes never leaving Jake's face. "You're lucky to be alive. The dogs found you just in time, but I need to know what happened to you out there. Who did this to you?" Jake's eyes flickered as he tried to gather his thoughts. His head was spinning, but he knew he had to tell Michael everything. This was his chance, his only chance, to prove his innocence. And for the first time in days, he felt the faintest flicker of hope. "My name's Jake Lawson," he began slowly, his voice weak but determined. "I used to be a soldier, part of a special forces team. I was good at what I did until I was set up." Michael leaned in closer, sensing the gravity of what Jake was about to say. "I was framed for a crime I didn't commit," Jake continued, his voice tight with emotion. "There was an operation we were working on, a covert mission, but everything went wrong. I was the one who got blamed for it. The evidence was planted, and before I knew it, I was sitting in a prison cell, accused of a crime I didn't even know about. I tried to tell the truth, but no one listened. The system failed me." Michael sat silently, his eyes narrowing as Jake spoke. He had heard of cases like this before, soldiers and civilians alike who had been caught in the crossfire of larger, more powerful operations. But hearing it from Jake himself made it all the more real. Jake's breath hitched as he continued, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. "They needed someone to take the fall. I was the perfect candidate. I knew too much, saw too much. So they set me up and threw me away, just like they've done with so many others. But I didn't do it, Michael. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't even know what was going on." Michael could see the pain in Jake's eyes. It wasn't just the physical toll that had been exacted on him. It was the emotional toll of being betrayed by the very system he had once fought for. Jake had given everything to his country, only to be discarded when he was no longer useful. The betrayal had shattered him. "I need your help." "Michael," Jake whispered, "I need you to believe me. I need you to help me prove my innocence." Michael stood up, his broad frame casting a shadow over Jake. He looked down at the young man, his mind racing. He knew what it meant to trust someone with your life. He had done it countless times in his own career, but Jake's story was different. There was a darker undercurrent to this situation, an undercurrent that Michael knew all too well. The kind of corruption that ran deep, that didn't just affect individuals, but entire systems. "I believe you," Michael said, his voice low but resolute. "But this goes beyond you and me. This is bigger than I thought. Those men who left you out there, they're not just criminals. They're connected to a larger network, one I've crossed paths with before, and they don't play by the rules." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Michael's jaw tightened. "I've seen these people before. I've dealt with them before. They're dangerous. They're the kind of people who pull strings from the shadows, who think they can control everything. And now, they've targeted you. But they made a mistake." Jake's brow furrowed. "What mistake?" "They left you alive," Michael said grimly. "And that's a mistake they won't get to make twice." There was a heavy silence between them, the weight of the situation settling in. Michael's words weren't just comforting, they were a warning. The road ahead would be treacherous, full of danger and uncertainty. But Jake wasn't alone anymore. With Michael and the K-9 team by his side, they would fight together to uncover the truth. "I won't let them get away with this," Michael said firmly. "I promise you." Jake's lips curled into a weak but sincere smile. "Thank you." Michael nodded. "We're not done yet, Jake. This is just the beginning. But we're going to make them pay for what they did." Outside, the storm was beginning to settle. The snowstorm that had ravaged the forest now seemed distant, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Inside the station, however, Michael's resolve was unshaken. He had made his choice. He wasn't going to walk away from this. Not now. Not ever. And as the K-9S rested nearby, their watchful eyes never leaving Jake, Michael knew one thing for certain. The battle for justice had just begun. The days that followed Jake's recovery were filled with tension and a sense of urgency. The storm had passed, but a quiet storm of a different kind brewed in the hearts of Michael Hayes and Jake Lawson. The decision had been made. They would go after the people who had framed Jake, and with the help of the K-9 team, they would uncover the truth. Michael had come to see Jake not as a convict, but as a man wronged by a corrupt system. As the days passed, the bond between the two men grew stronger, built on trust and a shared sense of justice. Titan, the lead German shepherd, had become more than just a companion. He had become a symbol of hope for Jake, a living testament to the idea that loyalty and courage could overcome even the darkest of circumstances. It was a cold morning when Michael and Jake stood together outside the ranger station. their breath visible in the frosty air. Michael's eyes were focused, and his jaw was set with determination. Jake, though still scarred by the events that had unfolded, had a quiet confidence in his gaze. He wasn't just the man who had been framed anymore. He was the man who was going to take back his life. The K-9 unit, led by Titan, stood at the ready. The four dogs, Titan, Daisy, Axel, and Max, were more than just trained animals. They were warriors in their own right, each with their own unique talents, and they had proven time and time again that they were an unstoppable force when working together. Rachel Vance, their handler, stood by the door of the station, her eyes scanning the horizon. She had been with the team for years, and though she had been a part of many rescues and operations, this one was different. This wasn't just another mission. This was personal. "We're ready," Michael said to Rachel, his voice calm, but filled with an undercurrent of urgency. "We've got one shot at this." Rachel nodded, her expression hardening. "Let's make it count. These guys aren't just criminals, they're organized. They'll do anything to protect themselves." The K-9s barked in unison, as if to signal that they were more than ready for what lay ahead. Titan's eyes glinted with a quiet intelligence, and it was clear that the dog understood the gravity of the mission. There was something almost human in the way he looked at Michael and Jake, as if he knew that this was their final chance to bring the criminals to justice. As they set out, Michael and Jake walked side by side, with the K-9 team forming a protective perimeter around them. The snow crunched beneath their boots, and the cold wind bit at their faces, but neither of them cared. The past few days had been a blur of planning and strategy, piecing together the puzzle of the criminal network that had wronged Jake. They had already uncovered some crucial details, names, locations, and clues that would lead them to the heart of the operation. Titan led the way, his powerful frame cutting through the snow as if he were born to lead this mission. Axel, the strong and dependable dog, walked alongside him, while Daisy and Max flanked the rear. Each dog knew its place, each one ready to act at a moment's notice. The team moved like a well-oiled machine, their movements synchronized as they navigated through the snow-covered woods. They were closing in on their target, the headquarters of the criminal syndicate that had orchestrated Jake's downfall. As they approached the area, Michael's eyes narrowed. He could feel the tension in the air, a sense that the moment of truth was drawing near. "This is it," Jake whispered, his voice tight with anticipation. "This is where it all started." Michael nodded, his jaw clenched. "And this is where it ends." As they neared the building, Michael and Jake exchanged a brief glance. They both knew that this wouldn't be easy. The people they were up against were ruthless, and they wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to protect their interests. But Michael had made a promise to Jake, and he intended to keep it. They would bring the criminals to justice, no matter the cost. Titan, who had been leading the way, suddenly stopped and raised his head, his ears twitching as he listened intently. Daisy and Axel followed suit, their eyes scanning the surroundings. Max, ever the curious one, sniffed the air, his tail wagging nervously. Titan's eyes locked onto something in the distance, and with a low growl, he signaled for the group to stop. Michael felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "What is it, boy?" he muttered under his breath. Titan barked sharply, his body tense. Then, as if guided by some invisible force, he moved forward with purpose. The other dogs followed closely, their eyes alert, their bodies poised for action. The building loomed ahead, a dilapidated structure that looked abandoned at first glance. But Michael knew better. This was the hideout of the criminals they were after. The dark windows and the rusted metal doors were all signs that this was no ordinary building. Inside, the criminals were waiting, watching, and preparing to make their move. Titan led them to the back of the building, where a narrow alleyway led to a hidden door. The dogs began sniffing around, and Titan's nose twitched as he picked up a scent. With a bark, he signaled the others to move closer. Michael crouched down, his eyes scanning the area. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. "We moving fast," Michael whispered to Jake. "Stay close." Jake nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose. With Michael and the K-9s by his side, he wasn't just running anymore. He was fighting for his freedom, for his future, and for the justice he had been denied. As they approached the door, Titan growled again, a low, rumbling sound that sent a shiver down Michael's spine. The dog's instincts were sharper than ever. With one swift motion, Michael pushed the door open, and the team burst into the building. The criminals inside didn't expect them. Chaos erupted immediately as Michael and Jake moved through the building, with the K-9 team leading the charge. Titan took the lead, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, while Daisy and Axel kept close behind, ensuring no one could escape. Max, with his youthful energy, darted around, sniffing out any hidden dangers. The fight was quick but intense. The criminals, caught off guard, scrambled to defend themselves, but they were no match for the K-9s. Titan and the others moved with precision, subduing the intruders one by one. Michael and Jake worked together, clearing room after room, each step bringing them closer to the truth. Finally, they reached the heart of the operation, the room where the leader of the syndicate, a man named Victor Hale, was hiding. He was a man in his early 50s, with graying hair and a cold, calculating demeanor. He had orchestrated everything, from framing Jake to manipulating the legal system. Now he was cornered. Victor stood there, his eyes narrowing as he realized the game was up. "You think you've won?" he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "You have no idea what you're up against." Michael stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Victor's. "You've lost, Hale. It's over." With the criminals apprehended and the operation dismantled, Michael and Jake stood victorious. Titan, ever loyal, walked up to Jake and nudged him gently with his head, as if to say, "It's done." Jake smiled weakly, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I owe you my life," Jake said, his voice filled with emotion. Michael clapped him on the shoulder. "You don't owe me anything. You're free, Jake. You've earned it." As the K-9s stood proudly by their side, Michael knew that their journey wasn't just about bringing justice to Jake. It was about the bond they had formed, the trust they had built, and the unwavering loyalty that had brought them all together. The storm had passed, and the future was bright. Jake was no longer a man running from his past. He was a man starting a new life. And as for Michael, he had found a new sense of purpose, one that came from helping others, one that would guide him for the rest of his days. As we come to the end of this story, there's an important lesson to reflect on. No matter how tough life gets, no matter how many obstacles we face or how deeply we've been wronged, there is always a way forward. Sometimes it's the unexpected bonds, like the one between Jake and Michael, or the unwavering loyalty of Titan and the K-9 team, that can carry us through the darkest times. The power of trust, perseverance, and standing up for what's right is something we can all carry into our daily lives. It reminds us that even in the hardest moments, we're not alone, and there's always hope for redemption. If you found this story inspiring, I encourage you to share with others who might need a reminder of courage and loyalty. Leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts on the story, and don't forget to subscribe for more. May God bless each and every one of you watching, and may His grace guide your path. If you believe in the power of faith, strength, and loyalty, type Amen in the comments and let's spread some positivity together.